Raúl Ruidíaz is obviously publicly announced that he has tested positive. So far, he is asymptomatic. Hopefully, it'll remain that way. The Peruvian Federation follows the same quarantine as MLS, and the same rehab protocol. So he'll be in isolation in Peru for a period of time. And if he comes through that period and is still asymptomatic, then he will be deemed to be no longer infectious and will be permitted to travel, at which point he would fly back to Seattle. And then our doctors have to look at him. But if he passes all the screens on the Seattle end, then he would immediately be able to play. So we would anticipate that he will be eligible if all goes well, if all goes to plan, if he remains healthy, that he will be able to play on October 27th. So we'll see how it goes. We'll keep you guys updated if there are significant deviations from that timeline. But as of this moment, and I stress this is 2020, this is COVID land. Every day seems to take a week. Things always change. But as of this moment, that is the plan with Raúl Ruidíaz. The second topic I'll tackle at the Open is that I'm pleased to announce that we will remain in USL for 2021. That's a league that we think has been key in developing our players. And you guys have probably seen or heard some reporting to the effect that MLS may be working on other solutions long term, and we remain open to those as well. And we'll be a participant in all those discussions as to how a potential pro player pathway is developed. But for 2021 only, which is, and again, nothing, I say only just because, again, in this world, we don't know what's happening 6 months from now, let alone a year from now. But, we've made a 1-year commitment to be in USL in 2021. So those are, I think, the big news items. I guess the third one is just that we don't know anything about the Colorado game. Obviously, it was postponed. We don't know, postponed, canceled, rescheduled. We have no new information on that. So with those three things out of the way, fire away.
Sorry, Garth, did you say 22nd or 27th with Raúl?
27th.
Thank you. Garth, is that an appeal, or is that because it would just be kind of overlap, or as far as quarantining? If he goes through and he's okay, and then he travels back, is that just like an overlap of days? And as far as the 10-day goes.
Yeah, the Peruvian Federation follows the same quarantine as MLS. So we would expect them to follow a 10-day quarantine from date of positive test. Again, that's not in our control. That's why I put those qualifiers around there. But that's what we believe they're going to do. When Raúl returns, he falls under a category of recovered person. And again, that's dependent on him passing the test when he returns, and him being asymptomatic. If he is all of those things and he is deemed a recovered person, then he would not need to quarantine any further and would immediately be eligible to play.
Hey, Garth, I just wanted to know how much does this...
And Nico, sorry, real quick, Jada, I don't mean to be pedantic at all, but the idea behind the recovered person concept is simply that once you've had COVID and you have antibodies and you're not infected anymore, then you are not vulnerable to get the disease, at least in the short term. It's roughly a 90-day period where you're deemed this recovered person status, but for us, that would take you through the end of our season.
Okay.
Sorry, Nico.
If I could just one follow up though, when was his last negative test?
I don't know, Jada, but his positive test was on the 11th of October.
All right, Garth, just kind of wanted to know, I know we talk about the future, and the future is a long time from now, but how much does this change as an organization, the fact that, players are going to have to once again leave for the next round of the qualifiers? And, we've spoken in the past before about those sanctions and, how does all this change, and how much leverage does it give the league to, maybe say, hey, maybe next time we just won't let these guys go?
FIFA is the governing body for soccer around the world, and They were very clear in their guidance around the October window that if you didn't release your players, they were nonetheless barred from playing in your domestic games. So, I don't think that there's, MLS worked with other leagues around the world. They worked with FIFPro, the Global Players Union, to try to present an opinion, a point of view that, playing these games was not the best idea. But that's what FIFA held, and I wouldn't expect FIFA to change their mind between now and November, absent some kind of massive outbreak, which of course none of us hope for. So we're just hoping to get our players back home safely. It's unfortunate what happened with Raúl, but Peru's taking good care of him, and we'll take good care of him when he gets home. And in November we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And I would anticipate, though, that guys coming back from international duty will have some type of quarantine on the way back. And we'll just have to figure out what to do with that again once we get a playoff schedule, because that obviously hasn't been announced as yet.
Hey, Garth, have you talked to him just, from a personal level, how he's doing? Has the club, had any discussion with him, just how he's doing overall at this time?
I have not personally talked to Raúl, but multiple members of our staff have. And my understanding is that he is doing well, and that he is, as you can imagine, being in isolation in a hotel room, probably not your first choice of things to do, especially for potentially over a week. But he's making the best of it. He's doing the best he can.
Thanks.
Hey, Garth, you guys have done such a good job of sort of going through the protocols and keeping everybody safe, and really haven't had too many issues. This is kind of a scare, though, kind of a shot across the bow. Does it kind of reaffirm your guys' stance on how you deal with all of it?
It's a good reminder for all of us, right? I mean, if the president can get it, then clearly anybody can get it. And international travel is probably a little bit more precarious than anything else. And we're talking about players and going to countries that have transmission rates, look, unfortunately comparable to the U.S., because the U.S.'s transmission rate isn't great. So, we're just we have to control what we can control, and if FIFA dictates that we have to release the players, look, we're certainly not going to fight that. I mean, I talked to maybe a smaller group of you maybe a couple of days ago, but we talked about, we're so happy that we had the culture that Roman Torres and Brad Smith wanted to come back and would structure contracts to come back on, less money now and more later. And, but the reason they do that is because we release our players for international duty, and we do things affirmatively that are really positive for our players and our players' best interest. And, we're going to continue to do that. That's a really important part of our culture. And we look at it as then we have to manage the knock-on effects of that on the team on the back end. And look, if, in terms of the playoffs in November, I certainly hope we can figure something out, whether it's through scheduling or some other way to have all our players here to play playoff games, but ultimately, if that's not possible, then we'll deal with it and we'll do the best we can.
Speaking of playoffs, Garth, I know I guess the word around MLS is that there is not going to be a second bubble for a variety of logistical reasons, but how concerned are you that things are like there's a bunch of cancellations this week? There's been some growing rates of transmission within the league. How concerned are you about being able to safely complete a season in the playoffs?
I'd say Virgil, I just said, Jeremiah, which is that we control what we can control. I think Coach Spencer and his staff and our players and our medical staff have done an awesome job of keeping our guys safe. And I think Sheila Tatsunami and the coaching staff of Defiance did a great job of keeping them safe. They were in a lot of ways managing an even trickier gauntlet of traveling domestically on commercial flights throughout their season, and that's now concluded. So, I think we've done as an organization done a pretty good job of managing this as best we can. We're going to keep doing that, and we cannot control what is outside our bubble and our environment. We can't control what other teams are doing. But we're going to do the best we can to keep our guys healthy, and we're going to remain committed to that. And that's, again, that's everything else is really, unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it. But, it's the question of, am I worried about, can the season conclude? I'm not aware of a mass outbreak. We've seen outbreaks in the NFL and that season go on. We saw some relatively large outbreaks in Major League Baseball with the Cardinals or the Marlins. If they're playing the league championship series now, so those leagues continue. You do have examples of teams playing in market, and getting through their seasons. And I wouldn't imagine from a medical perspective, at least, that we would be radically different than either one of those.
Did you guys have to do anything different or increase testing at all when you did find out that Raúl was positive? Did anything change?
Nothing changed for our team. The medical information we had was that he received a positive result when he was with Peru, that he was not infected prior to departure. That's the best information we have.
Along with completing the season, there was talk, I guess maybe there is talk as far as the seedings go, doing a points per game instead of the standard way that the playoff berths are made. I know that either way, that's not going to affect. So far, it's not going to affect you. What is your opinion about that, or what have you kind of heard as far as the way that berths can be given, considering Colorado might not be able to make up all of those games?
Well, yeah, that would impact us, right, Jada? Because we might, in theory, play. Although we have the Galaxy game that was canceled, rescheduled. There are no open dates to reschedule the Colorado game, so that is something that could impact us. A points per game determination versus playing all the games. So again, it's another one that's outside our control. I do think that the league will look at points per game as certainly as one factor. Whether that's the only factor, whether that's the controlling factor, I don't know. Again, these are unprecedented times. Every day feels like a week. Every week feels like a month. And I'm sure it depends on how many of these games can get rescheduled that Colorado's missed, and how many teams are impacted, and what's the playoff chase look like, and all those kinds of things. So a whole bunch of factors that go into it, and we'll see ultimately if our game with Colorado gets replayed or not. But either way, we'll be flexible. That's what this year calls for, and we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to play the teams we play, and we'll win as many times as we can, and we'll let the chips fall where they may from that point.
I guess what I meant more so was that you guys would. So far, it seems like you would still stay in first, but with that though, with the days, I mean, do you even? Like if they pushed it back, or is there anything, when you say flexibility, is there any way to squeeze in another game though for that Colorado that you see?
There are no open makeup dates for us between now and November 8th. The one that was open was November 4th, 5th, and we rescheduled the LA Galaxy game into that window. So am I answering your question, Jada?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Garth,
Can you talk about this weekend match, please, Mr. Lagerwey?
Sorry, something about the weekend match? I apologize, my connection wasn't great.
Yes, my name is Rico Ramirez here in San Francisco, California. I'll be covering your match against the Earthquakes this week. This was Sunday. Can you tell me when are you coming? How is all the plan due to coronavirus for the team concerning this particular game?
Sure, yeah. And apologies that didn't come through the first time. Thanks for the question. We will follow standard MLS protocol, which is traveling in the day of the game. We arrive then on a chartered flight, so it's in a secure environment the whole way for our players to protect our players and staff. And we will come into San Jose and play the match, and then we'll fly out that night. So although we're physically present in a hotel and we eat a meal there, there's very limited time indoors, and it's a very tightly controlled environment where only members of our team bubble are present. No outsiders are present. So that's standard MLS protocol, and so far it's proven to be fairly effective in terms of keeping teams safe when they travel.
Nick, go ahead. It looks like you have a question. Go for it.
Hey, Gar, how you doing? So this is Nick Negrini from Pulso Sports. So Gar, the next qualifiers from the CONMEBOL is next month in November. So in case are coming again and they call for Raúl, Sounders are going to do something for don't send him to Peru?
Well, if we are, I mean, we don't know what FIFA's guidance is going to be relative to the November window. So that's step one. So in September, FIFA said under certain circumstances you can resist the call. Now, to be clear, we chose not to. We let Gustav Svensson go to Sweden in that circumstance. In October, FIFA issued guidance that said you have to release, and so we released. And so if the guidance from FIFA is the same, then we'll release our players.
Thank you.
Other questions, guys, before we let Garth go?
Yeah, just one more, Garth. You touched base a little bit on this about the day travel. I was just wondering if you'd give us an insight, just the massive undertaking it is to take the group of players from Seattle to wherever they're playing, and just for an organization, all the planning, because we have no idea. And obviously it's a major undertaking.
Yeah, it's a lot of risk management stuff. So that travel party stays as small as it possibly can be. So somebody like me, a front office guy, we don't even go. You know, we this is, you know, players and essential staff, and we take in most instances 3 and 4 medical personnel on that trip to ensure that every step of the protocol is followed every inch of the way. You know, in terms of what is it like to take it? I mean, I'll add one other thing, Moz. The MLS has been very cautious to try to limit games in this phase to travel of 2 hours or less. I think our trip to LA, for example, is slightly longer than that, but it's right around that 2-hour mark. And, you know, so they've to try to, in other words, to limit this travel, limit the amount of time, you know, when players and staff could be exposed or are at risk. So, you know, you should ask Coach Spencer what it's like to be on the airplane and all that stuff and transfer from the bus to the hotel. But, you know, in terms of the procedures and the protocols, it's a lot of people doing a lot of work. And look, the only thing I'd say is, you know, at this point, we're pretty used to it. You know, when we went into the Disney bubble, there was a pretty rigorous process to get down there and a pretty rigorous process while we were there. And, you know, for better or worse, that's become the new normal, you know, and because even that now that you're not in a collective bubble, you're still really in a bubble for your team. You know, you are responsible to all of your teammates, all of your fellow staffers when you go home. You know, you cannot go and socialize. You know, you have to be very careful when you're going to the grocery store, as one example. So, and the less contact outside the home, the better. And so our guys, I think, have been incredibly disciplined in terms of adhering to those things on and off the field in what's been a very trying season.
Thank you.
All right, if I could sneak one in, Jason Mitchell at SBI. It's obviously unprecedented times for all of us, and there's been some interesting discussions surrounding the question of accountability in the time of COVID-19, about whether it's even fair to part ways with coaches right now. I was curious to get your take on that. And as someone who will have to at some point do performance reviews of some sort, how much you'll be taking the extremely bizarre nature of this year into account.
Well, I have no plans to fire Coach Spencer, Jason, so you're going to have to wait on that one for a while. For those who know me pretty well, we're teasing. We'd be said multiple times this year, we'd be excited to have Coach Spencer here for a long time along with his staff. But look, I think it is a harsh environment provided, you know, those standards are maintained and those structures are in place. I mean, but I absolutely cannot speak for any organization, any other organization. You know, again, we have to try to control what we can control here. And every situation is different for every other club. And for me to speak to or comment on, you know, their personnel moves would be, I think, irresponsible.
Garth, I wanted to know, kind of going off of what Masvita had asked, there are the conversation of people who believe that the best way to handle the playoff to ensure that everybody is at their best is going back to a bubble format. Where does your opinion or thoughts kind of surround that idea of just doing a bubble for playoffs?
This is a really important point. I don't think I should have an opinion. I don't think you should, Nico. I don't think Jeremiah should. I don't think anybody should. I think the doctor should. The doctor should tell us what's right and what's safe. And right now, we have protocols in place for in-market games that the medical professionals have deemed safe. So if at some point they say that that's not safe, then I have no doubt that will change. And right now they say they are safe. And you know, unequivocally have to follow, the local, the state, county public health regulations, and we have to follow the medical advice and the data. And it is, again, I think on some level irresponsible for people like me in a front office to have an opinion one way or the other. I think it's all about what keeps our staff and our players as safe as we can possibly make them.
Charlie Boehm, I see you got your hand raised there. If you want to ask a question, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Hey, Garth, thanks for your time today. I had I guess it's a two-parter, but you mentioned the USL commitment for next year, and I was wondering if you could share your kind of general outlook on how that is working for your club, and I know sounds like you're just looking at 1 year for now, but maybe what the big picture pro-con outlook has been for you with that relationship and that setup.
Look, we felt, and I think we've signed, Alex can correct me here, but I think we signed 7 or 8 homegrown players from our Defiance team in the last 18 months roughly. So in that sense, I think it's been a good launching pad. Now, signing those kids is the first step. What we need to do now is get those kids to break through and start playing meaningful minutes for our first team. So, but I do think that having some sort of development team is a critical piece in that process. And I think for the past couple of years, the USL has been a good space for us. Now, in general, this year's been a bummer for player development because for all the safety reasons, we cannot move players between teams. We can't. Normally, we would take guys and train them with the first team and then send them down to Defiance to play games and get that experience. And that simply wasn't possible. In the case of 2 kids, we actually just wholesale took them down to Defiance, Ethan Doubleair and Alfonso Campo Chavez, and had them be there full time because getting games was so important to their development. And now they will come back up after quarantining and then eventually rejoin the first team. But as long as COVID's here, I think it's going to be a really tricky situation in terms of developing players and what's best for them. As some of you may know, we hired John Hutchinson in the off season, and he's done a great job. So he's a guy that's overseeing all of these young players and their development once they get signed to the first team. And he's been working with them extensively on both an individual and team basis. And he's done a ton of stuff for us. And, look, our development staff has done a great job as well. Chris Little, Wade Weber, keeping the guys safe and keeping them going forward. And Henry Braun, our director of player development, to really manage what was a difficult season at Defiance, if we're honest. I mean, these guys, in part because of conflicts with stadium availability at Cheney Stadium, because the Major League Baseball season was disrupted. We had to go on an 11-day road trip, and those guys again kept everybody safe and on point. And so, a long-winded way of answering your question, but basically, we're going to continue trying to challenge these kids. We're going to continue to put younger teams playing against guys with a little bit more experience. But certainly we want to be part of whatever the MLS decides going forward as well. It won't just be what's best for the Seattle Sounders. It'll be what's best for our league. And again, I don't think anyone's going to be capable.
In a somewhat adjacent space, Caden Clark's signing, his situation this past week is, and I hadn't heard your view on this. I don't know if you prefer to speak from the Sounders' perspective or from your own, if there's any space there, just your general big picture outlook on that matter.
And I apologize, Charlie. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the Caden Clark signing.
So the Red Bulls, to bring a kid up from their 2 team to sign him to an MLS contract, had to work a deal with Minnesota because of territorial rights that were of varying degrees of I guess, strength or depth, depending on your perspective. And so this seems to be a topic that different clubs in the league have different perspectives on. Some seem to appreciate having the maps. Others think that it's a hindrance. And I hadn't heard your perspective or Seattle's on it. So hoping to get maybe, again, a big picture view of whether you think that scenario, the status quo, is working.
It is a very complicated issue, the homegrown rights. It's one that we've talked about on a CSO, a chief soccer officer level, and we've not been able to find a consensus. So it's tricky. I think, just speaking to me personally, this is not even as the general manager of the Seattle Sounders. For me personally, Fewer restrictions is better. That'll lead to more players and reaching fewer teams. And if we can concentrate the best players on fewer teams within the country, that'll probably raise the level of play. If we raise the level of play, then that accelerates development. And those are, again, I would admit that's a great philosophical way of looking at it. There are tons of practical realities that interfere and often have to be administered on a case-by-case basis. So it's a tricky issue, and it's one that I would tell you can only be solved on a league level. A Sounders position on it doesn't particularly accomplish anything. That's represents what it looks like in our corner of the world, and what you need is a policy for the United States as a whole. I think that's something that's we've had lots of conversations about on a league level, at an ownership level, and so far we haven't found a solution.
Thank you.
Speaking of player development, I just wanted to ask real quick: is there any updates on what's going on with Sam Rogers right now?
I do not have any updates there, Jeremiah.
Thanks.
Garth, you had mentioned Raúl. He could be determined as a recovered person, but who returns him back to the States? Does he fly charter, or is it Peru, or how does he get back here?
I believe the plan is to fly him on a commercial flight from Lima to Seattle, but that flight literally hasn't been purchased or secured yet, Jada, because he has to safely complete the quarantine. He has to remain asymptomatic. He has to pass the doctor's tests, and it's only when we get medical advice that it's safe for him to travel and not be infectious that we can move forward with trying to secure his return home.
Garth, have you seen Xavier Arreaga play the two Ecuador games? I just kind of wanted to know if you had any, insight of what you've seen out of him.
Chris Henderson watched both those games, so you can ask him that. Unfortunately, I was not able to watch those games live, and it's on my list. A couple other things that come up this week.
Absolutely. What's your expectation on his return?
I'm not aware of any medical issues with Javier, so I would anticipate him being back. I think he's actually supposed to come back as soon as tomorrow, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. So then he would start his quarantine period, and at the completion of the quarantine, then he'd return to join the team.
Thank you.
And do you have an update for Gustav too?
Gustav is similar. I think he might be the day after tomorrow, might be tomorrow. Anyway, both those guys are coming back soon. And once they're here, then they have a 9-day quarantine. The league just amended that this morning from 10 days to 9 days. 9-day quarantine period, and my memory is that both of them would be available for the game on the 27th. Same as Raúl.